So that's the first thing. And then there were no students in these responses. I mean, there might have been some students who also worked, but we didn't try to, as some other studies have, bulk up the number based on students. Just to take a look at some of the results, highlights that we've got strong support for the importance to recruit and retain the right talent, strong agreement about the importance and understanding of business acumen and business literacy. Writing topped the list of important skills, but it was followed closely by listening, which was interesting, and then creativity. We found strong support for gender compensation parity, and the scores were relatively low when we asked about the importance of working with marketing.
And so then we also asked a few questions about where PR and comms should be reporting and to whom should they have access. And so we had pretty strong support for PR and comms having direct reporting lines to the C-suite, as well as having access to the CEO. But the results for reporting directly to the CEO were relatively low compared to having access to and reporting to the C-suite. The ability to measure behavior and outcomes was also fairly high, was rated fairly high among across our data set. People also believed that all PR pros should have a global mindset. For the premium report, the premium edition report that we created, we've also segmented the data between agency employees and corporate employees. And so we try to parse out the differences between their perceptions and what they think is going to be important for the field moving forward. And so we found that corporate pros, of course, as you can imagine, believe that in-house and own media are going to be more important than agency pros do. We also segmented the data based on gender and age, and we found interestingly that women and younger professionals find narrative and storytelling to be very important for the future, more so than men and older professionals do. Ethics and CSR were found to be more important among men than among women, and similarly ethics and CSR were found to be more important among younger professionals than older professionals. We also had a bunch of questions about new technologies, and we found that agency employees tend to consider application of new technologies more important than corporate professionals do. Agencies also seem to be more advanced in using technology than the agency employees, which tracks given that agencies need to, in general, be more advanced in how they're utilizing different technologies to be able to make arguments about retention and so on for corporations. Agencies also report more integration than corporations do, and very interestingly, men and older respondents believe that new technology is going to be more important moving forward, and more so than women and younger professionals. And most interestingly, we had about 20 respondents who were over 70 years of age, and among those, the number on a scale of 1 to 5, the number for importance of new technology was 4.25, whereas everybody else was under 3.5. So that was really interesting, and I add a caveat that there are only 20 participants above the age of 70, but it is an interesting finding. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
That sounds like a good list for us, our next list, 20 over 70, 40 under 40, etc., etc. It's time to give the oldies a shout out. Some fascinating stuff there, Arunima and Don. Let's sort of link that into, do you want to just clarify the sort of marketing communications integration thing, because it's a hot topic. How integrated are they? The data kind of says that yes, integration is important, and maybe 60% of people think that and think they're on the route to it, but that means 40% don't. So just clarify that sort of data point for us.
Absolutely. So we had a few questions that we asked about integration, and we asked our respondents to what extent their companies have integrated PR comms and marketing together. And we found that about 60% of the sample said that they were either somewhat or completely integrated. We also had an additional question on how successful collaboration between marketing and communications is. And what we found was that the division was similar, so about 60% said it was successful or very successful, whereas the other 40% were not quite sure whether collaboration between marketing and communications was entirely successful. So we took inspiration from that, and in fact, Ray Kocher spoke extensively about this particular finding on Monday. And so we took inspiration from this particular finding, and we tried to identify whether that 60%, the 60% who say that their PR and comms and marketing are integrated, to what extent do they think it's successful? And so we passed that data out a little bit. In fact, it was this morning, so it is literally fresh off the presses on my computer, I guess. And so what we found was that 73% of that 60%, so of the 60% that report that their companies are completely or somewhat integrated with respect to marketing communications and PR and comms, of those 60%, 73% report that collaboration with marketing is somewhat to very successful, which is a really interesting finding. Because that tells us what kinds of skills our students need. As educators, that's definitely important to us. What kinds of skills we need to be teaching the next generation of PR professionals, as well as what kinds of skills the industry is going to be looking for in the future.
Yeah, Ray Kocher is the former global CEO of Ketchum, and he's now a professor at Boston University, so he was another of the driving forces behind this survey. And I don't know if everyone knows, but it's actually Communications Week this week, so that was an event on Monday in New York, and this, I guess, is part of Communications Week as well. I know it's Ideas Week in Chicago, but it's also Communications Week. So Marissa, how does that tally with what you're seeing in-house and doing the job? Obviously, research is great, and you've got a really robust set of data there, but how did those findings sort of tally with what you're seeing?
Sure. Maybe I'll start with the integration topic, picking up on that. So at Ford Motor Company, we are a global company and have we are siloed. We have our own communications function, we have our own marketing function. But when we talk about needing to break through, the integration is really key, and we struggle. I mean, being siloed in a big global company, it is a struggle. It's not easy, but when we do it right, we do see the success. And I think for the PR professionals in the room, the key obviously is the broader amplification, the broader support you have to be able to reach that consumer audience, which the limited resources normally the communications function has access to can only be bigger and better teaming up with marketing. And it also has given us longevity to be more successful on certain campaigns or product launches. So that's really near and dear to our heart. We're continuing to try to drive, and especially my role as brand communications, drive that integration with marketing on the big milestones.
Christine, you work for a cutting-edge technology company. The tech findings were interesting, weren't they? Because you would have expected to see a lot higher scores on the scale than we saw. Do you think that is the case at your company, or are Silicon Valley companies further ahead on this, or is actually the communicators, especially in-house, need to pay more attention to this?
Sorry, I want to mention I'm talking about new technologies.
Yeah, and looking forward and things like VR, AR were scored fairly low on the survey when communicators were asked what they were considering.
Sure. I think in our program, what we ended up being most important were technology tools where we could better understand our own customers. So data and insights. Pinterest is a database of intentions that lets you know what people are going to buy, where they're going to travel. And so having the ability to understand SQL and data insights is actually the most important use of technology. So AR and VR certainly get a lot of attention, but I think more of the sophisticated tools are helping people run better businesses and tell better stories.
So we talked about this a little bit earlier. PR people often come from more of an arts mindset, and increasingly they're going to need a more technological skill set. How do you see that playing out now and in the future?
Well, I hope someday we can both be left brain and right brain. And I do think there's a fair amount of analysis that goes into our jobs. I think the definition of who a PR person is has changed pretty radically. Some of my favorite hires this year have been a data scientist who can help us tell smarter stories. And so I think as we become more inclusive, and that includes people's backgrounds, I think you'll see people who love to do both, and they go well in hand.
Yeah, are you seeing that as well, Marissa?
Yes, it's an area, we luckily have a fairly large analytics team at Ford, but we have now carved out, as part of our global data and analytics team, a role for communications and a team eventually of professionals that will be dedicated just to communications and at the same time in marketing. So it's definitely growing quickly. It's something that we are grateful to have the access to now, because it was kind of like, oh, well, communications doesn't really need the data. We need to know who's buying our cars, and we need to know who's buying our services, and the tech trends. It's just as important as we look at the reputation. So we're definitely growing in-house.
What did you, both in-houses, make of the survey's findings on reporting lines? I mean, sometimes we get a bit overhung up about this, but some people won't actually even look at a job unless they're reporting it directly into the CEO, whereas others are happy as long as they're getting proper airtime and the ear of the C-suite, but not necessarily reporting directly into the CEO. How does that work?
We're very fortunate that we're 1,400 people, so that's significantly different than Ford. But I hope integration means a lot more than reporting structure or silos. Hopefully that means that we're being integrated and collaborative about what we're doing. We're fortunate enough that I speak to every member of the Directs team on a weekly, if not a daily basis. And I think that really comes down to, is PR and communications valued by the organization? And that, I think, is much more important than who you're reporting to or who's filling out your performance review.
So it's just certainly recently the CEO comms function has had to work quite closely together, so I'm assuming there's good communications lines there.
Yeah, crucial, and I think actually if we rewind to where the auto industry was back in about 2006, I had just joined Ford at the time. That's really where the turning point at Ford really happened, to elevate the role of communications, because it was the bailout times of the auto industry. Luckily Ford didn't go through it, but all of a sudden the importance of reputation and being able to tell a different story became so crucial. And it wasn't about advertising at the time, and it really wasn't about even selling more cars, because at the time the economy also wasn't that strong. And so that really elevated the position of and the value of communications globally at Ford. And ever since then, our head of global communications sits with the leadership team and is part of the leadership team, and that only then helps all of us have that direct access, not only to the CEO, but really to those core leaders who do value and understand the importance of not just paid conversation, but actually being able to build influence through earned.
Don, you're training the next generation of communicators. It was kind of comforting to see that writing is still top of the skills list, because we always associate that with the PR professional, and often bemoan the fact that in journalism as well, that the writing skills are going down. But that still came out as the top skill, didn't
Yeah,
it?
it came out as the top skill. As I mentioned earlier, listening was right up there, which you don't often see listening mentioned in a study of this nature, and understanding creativity. They were the three main points.
And Arunima, the other thing that came out is that you need to have a more rounded business mindset than just being focused on communications, and that very much came out of, if you're going to engage with the C-suite, if you're going to represent, if you're going to be able to give that high-level consultancy, you need to understand the business and the wider issues as well as the communications part.
And that's clearly one of the low points of public relations education that is being changed at a number of universities, but something that has been overlooked for too long.
And it absolutely echoes what we've been talking about throughout the conference, throughout the day as well, about speaking the language and being cognizant of what the business is and what different aspects of the business does, as well as coming out from the piece on integration, in that if you cannot speak the language of marketing, if you cannot speak the language of selling a product, if you don't know what the business is and how it's run, how are you going to effectively service an in-house client? Even if you're not with an agency, you are at the end of the day an in-house professional who's servicing a client, a business within. And so that is definitely borne out by our data. 4.4 on a scale of 5 in terms of importance of business skills, possessing business acumen is definitely something that we saw in data. As well as writing skills, 4.79, which is the highest of anything, and that actually echoes what Charlene was saying earlier this morning, I believe, about how writing is where we need to evolve the most. So definitely lots of connections with things we've heard throughout the day today.
Would you advise PR professionals to do an MBA, or are they getting those skills in the core PR programs?
In some programs they are. The problem that you have with graduate education is often people, when they get their undergraduate degree, they want to go out and go to work, and then they start making money, and maybe there is a marriage and there's children, and there's other factors that enter into the decision to go back to graduate school. But with the growth of online programs and at many major universities, there's quite a good relationship between what happens in the communications school and what happens in the business school.
And what we're seeing,
I was going to say, thank goodness I don't have an MBA.
what we're seeing increasingly in our own graduate population at BU, because we have a pretty big graduate program, is that many of our international students come with a business background, come with what is a BBA, Bachelor's of Business Administration, but don't have the writing skills, don't have the writing background that PR needs. And so they're coming to us to learn those things. So we still offer business kinds of courses, but also beef up their tactical and strategic thinking.
Christine, do you get talent from PR courses, or you talked about the different types of talent? Where do you find your talent now, and what's the most fertile ground for that?
We're really focused on inclusion. Pinterest has strong inclusion and diversity goals, as I spoke, and so that inclusion is purposefully looking for varied backgrounds. So while we maybe traditionally thought about media relations, data, speech writing, and many direct channels of communication, which is something we talked about today, right? As the media pool shrinks, what are other ways that you can directly communicate to your customers? So I think that requires, speech writers. I think that requires event planners. I think that requires a lot of things. We have this expression T-shaped. Is anyone familiar with it? Basically, one thing we look for when we hire is, somebody has a specialty, and it's great if you are the expert in that one thing, but you also need to have the ability to go across everything, and that balance between the two allows you to put the business first, but it also allows you to be the expert in what you do.
T-shaped and Britain is your breakfast. What about you, Marissa?
Sure.
You've got bigger teams and global recruiting policy. Are you getting the talent you need from the PR programs?
So, I think as we look at the way the industry for the automotive industry is being disrupted right now, it's so much more beyond gearheads, right? And for a while, communications and HR were the only teams in the company that had females for the most part. I mean, it was very sparse in terms of engineering, as you can imagine, IT, et cetera. And so as we look at, though, as the entire industry is starting to become more diverse, and the way we think about the future of transportation, it's no longer just about your personal ownership of a vehicle. We're thinking about a younger generation of services now, ride-hailing, autonomous vehicles. You all have, hear or see the trends that are out there now in the auto industry. That's also forcing us, even as communicators, to think differently about how do we need to even tell our stories differently now. And a lot of that is coming into more creativity, certainly on the visual side. And so we're really looking at how do we up the game in-house. We used to have a really strong in-house team as we were larger, and we scaled back through the various kind of challenges of the economies over the last probably 15 years or so. And now we're reviewing that again of what in-house creativity should we be bringing in, dedicated speech writers, dedicated visual arts. And that's where we're struggling. We haven't cracked it yet. We are trying to recruit more people to be able to come to Detroit. It's hard to get people to leave New York and Chicago and other areas, so we're growing, and Detroit is growing, but we are struggling to get some of the talent to want to move.
But just explain the exciting developments there, really taking over the old railway station in Detroit.
Yeah, so we purchased the iconic train station that was in downtown Detroit this past summer. We announced it, and so that is really going to become the hub and central location of all of the future transportation development for Ford. And so again, that's not just the products themselves, but it's also the services, and we're opening it up to where we want to invite, much like the spaces that we've seen today, invite other partners to come join us. So it's really meant to be this hub of the future of transportation in general, not just for Ford, but for tech companies, for startups, et cetera.
Arunima, you mentioned some of the differences between the male respondents and the female respondents. women found that responded that ethics and CSR were more important to them. Dig a little deeper into that for us.
I'll be really surprised by that.
So what we found was, that's a really good question, because we had a few questions on CSR specifically. And so we first asked, how important is CSR for you in choosing a company to work for? And in that we saw a significant difference between men and women. Women significantly wanted to work for a company with a strong CSR program more so than men did. However, when we asked about how significant or how important is CSR in your organization, there wasn't too much of a difference. So there is this desire, more so among women than among men, to work for a company that has a strong CSR program. Unfortunately, what it looks like is that employers aren't necessarily following that trend at the moment. And so that's definitely something that we need to think about. Are we driving CSR effectively in our organizations? Are our organizations oriented towards CSR? And for employers, women, if you have strong goals towards diversity and inclusion, and traditionally only HR and comms had women in their teams, well, now you know women more so than men do want CSR programs within the organization. So that's an interesting finding that we had from the survey.
John, everyone can check out the survey online at PRWeek.com. They can also see it in the magazine print edition. There's a premium edition that really does dig deep, which will be available next week, and you can check that out at PRWeek.com and get hold of that as well. Tell us why a survey like this is important. Why is it important to really look inside the industry like we have done, and what's the significance of it on a macro level?
Well, one of the realities of academic research often is that it's pretty esoteric and it's not necessarily useful to the people who are practicing, regardless of whether the field is public relations and communication, or it could be some other discipline. There are very few studies like this. There's a study that's done every year in Europe, the European Communication Monitor. They have more responses than we have. They're in the 2000s, but they only asked 22 questions. We asked 75, and understandably, there's a strong correlation. The more questions you ask, the fewer people are going to fill out your survey. We're still working on some of the particulars, but we want to do this study every year and be able to see how the trends, particularly trends like that Arunima was just talking about, women in CSR, is that going to go? Is that the gap between what we found this year going to be bigger next year or more narrow? So and it contributes to discussions of this nature, and that takes it's just overall good for the industry and those who practice within it.
Yeah, I hope so. Let's throw it open to the audience. We've got a few minutes left for questions, and hopefully people have got some questions. How about some new people who haven't asked one?
It's all right.
I appreciate you asking.
Oh, well, all right. So, just a little bit of information that business schools aren't quite as popular as they once were, and it's not as hard to get a graduate student from one department into an MBA program to take this course, or 2 or 3 or 5. The other thing is, just very quickly, Boston's a perfect example of having, Boston University, perfect example of having extraordinary adjuncts and part-time faculty available in a great urban business community. And just to be blunt, we have a business curriculum at Northwestern, but it's also helped along by the fact that we have accounting and budgeting taught by a practitioner who does this work. And so that's a very strong business skill necessary. But we also have a lot of big data analysis kinds of work that can be brought into the program too. In fact, we compete with the engineering school a lot more than we compete with the business school on it. I just think there is a question. I just wanted to point out that the communication piece can be bridged with business, And I wondered whether or not Boston University was looking at that, or I could ask the business people to demand that they look at that, because you're the real customers of these guys.
We're looking at that, but there's difficult political steps that you have to go through. We've tried to fix that for our students by hiring really noted practitioners, not to adjunct positions, but to full-time positions. And with Ray Kocher coming from Ketchum, and then most recently Gary Sheffer from GE, and Mike Fernandez, who until the merger took place was the U.S. CEO of Burson Marsteller. So that's what we've tried to do.
Christine, do you think there's a natural, I mean, that's great that professionals like that are going into the academic space, and Dave Tover I was on earlier, he's working at USC, but give them a mention as well, and other universities have got great people. But is there that natural lag in that the academic world kind of takes a while to catch up with, and the industry's kind of zoomed ahead, and there's a bit disconnect, if you get what I mean?
You will be pleased to know I am a wildcat. And I graduated 18 years ago, and I took a public relations class. We talked about new media. I took a writing for public relations class, all with adjunct professors. So I was well prepared, and I think it's only going to get better from here.
Marissa, what did you say?
So I'm Wolverine, University of Michigan. So go blue, exactly. Big game this weekend. You know, same curriculum was pretty diverse at the time. What's interesting, you know, we've been trying to recruit interns, especially again with this draw to try to get people to want to be in Michigan and be in Detroit. And our interns have been from all over the country and all the various programs. We have a lot of team coming from Northwestern. It's given a great school, but it's been interesting to watch how the curriculum has changed and where they need to spend their time. I think a lot actually have given us feedback when they go back of they didn't even realize the breadth of the skills that they actually need. And I think the business conversation has come up with our interns, at least at Ford, again, because of the dynamics of the economy and whatnot, that they are picking up that, you know what, I haven't been paying attention as much there. I know I might be focused on my writing, I might be focused on digital arts, I might be focused on visualization and social media, but not so much on business. And so it is actually in the reverse for us. We've heard a lot of our interns in summer talent kind of going back going, I think I need to take another look at that. So.
Yeah, someone was saying earlier that it's a continual process now, the education thing, you've got to keep topping up the skill set. Listen, I really urge you to check out the survey and the content and the premium survey. Fascinating insights in there that we can't really do justice to in this session, but thank you for doing that and giving the practical side, and thank you for giving the academic side. A round of applause for our panel.